Welcome back to the Nerd Nation, everybody. I'm Fox2, your host this week. We've got a very, very special episode. Let me get right into it and introduce who I'm here with. Today, we've got DePirate.
Hey, guys.
And we've got Topher.
Welcome back, everybody.
And we've got a very, very special guest this week. He's worked on many different characters in the comic book world. Shadowman, the Avengers, Hulk, Spider-Man, you name it, and he's been there and done that. So I'll get right into it. We have Mr. Bob Hall with us today.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much, by the way, for being a part of the podcast today. Let's jump right in. I was, in preparation for this podcast, I was just going through and trying to brush up on all of the different things that you've done, and it seems like you've touched so many different titles throughout your career. Is there one in particular that kind of stands out as a favorite or more memorable to you?
My favorite was a series called Armed and Dangerous that I did for Valiant because I created it, wrote it, and drew it. And it was a noir crime series. And I thought it was really good. And unfortunately, it was just when the old Valiant was going out of business, and I think the print run on the last issue was something like 10 issues or something. I'm exaggerating, but they didn't even used to give to me. So almost nobody saw it. But so I mention it every time I can to go to your comic book store, get the whole thing, and take a look at it.
How many issues was it?
It was 9 issues, with one of them that was in the middle was a special issue. It was the whole thing was intended eventually to go together as a graphic novel, but of course it never happened. And now I'm not even sure if it's owned by the New Valiant or if they I'm not sure even who has the rights to it for sure. But I hope someday that if they have it, I hope that someday they'll bring it back, but or reprint it.
So you created it, wrote it, drew it, everything, the whole deal by yourself?
Yeah, the whole thing. I did everything except the lettering. It was black and white.
Oh my gosh.
And it was set on New York's West Side. It was about a fictionalized version of the Westies. I say it was my version of The Sopranos, although it was pre-Sopranos. It was in the mid-'90s. And the Westies were the Irish West Side gang. And I'd actually worked a lot in that area, so I'd met some of those characters. And it was great fun because I was able to work in some things I knew about New York and some things that it was all fictionalized, but it's nice if you can put in some things that actually happened.
Pull from reality.
Yeah. Even if it's sort of a heightened reality, it keeps bringing it back and grounding it, and you don't feel as if this is all off in fantasy land. It's really science fiction. There were some things in it that I thought were details that I thought were great fun.
So for the sake of this podcast, we could potentially say that you might have been the pushing factor for The Sopranos. It could have been the inspiration.
You could say that. I think it's more likely that the one that I find that I if anybody read it, and I doubt that they did, but I did something that was like the Hunger Games once. In when I was doing Batman, just the next thing I did after Armed and Dangerous, I did an Elseworlds Batman where in the years the Legend of Batman had become the state religion of Gotham City, and there was a character called the Bruce, who was the god symbol, who was the Batman symbol, and they surgically created all the great Batman villains once a year with people who were rebels or enemies of the state, and there was a death race and a death run, so that all the villains were ritually killed unless one of them survived, which none of them ever did, except finally in this version the Joker character ends up killing the Batman and becoming the new Batman of Gotham City but still is the Joker. So it ends with him wearing the uniform and being the Joker at the same time. I kind of like that one.
Wow, that's interesting.
That's crazy.
That also sounds like a church I would actually join.
Yeah, I know, right? Like, sign me up.
Start one down. So that was fun too. That was again. I got to do the whole thing. So I enjoyed that.
So as a creator then of that, like, writer, artist, and everything. You mentioned that you weren't sure who had the rights to it. Now, how does that work as far as like a company like Valiant and like royalties? Like, do you own any part of that at all still, or do you?
I don't know what will happen. I doubt it very much. I really doubt that if they reprint anything that I will get anything, but I could. I don't really know. I don't know how the heck that works because it's a different company. And it was they just bought the material. It would be as if it wouldn't work that way because they didn't do royalties.
Okay.
It would have been as if when DC bought Captain Marvel, should the guys have gotten royalties on the reprints. Of course, I was working under a contract for Valiant at the time, so Valiant owned the series, even though it was a creator series.
Yeah, I've always been interested in the business side. Like if you join a title like that's been around since the 40s and like Superman or something like that. It's like there's being a guest on it is seems a little different than if you started creating it from issue number 1.
Yeah, if I had done it, if I had to do it again, I would probably have not gone that direction. I said, no, if I'm going to create it, I got to have at least some percentage of it. But I was, frankly, I was using the opportunity to I was doing so much of it, and once I was inking it, I had written and drawn Shadow Man, but I didn't ink it. And now that I was inking it, part of the reason I did that was that I decided I wanted to live in Europe. And I'd always wanted to go for a while, and so lived in England and Ireland for 2 years. And I could more easily get the book produced if I was doing it all. Also, though I was anxious to have the contract so that I knew I had some work while I was there. So it worked in that way. It gave me a chance to have an experience and say, okay, I know I'm covered for 2 years, but that was why I didn't really press on the creator-owned thing.
So, okay, so you wrote, I'm still, like, my jaw is still on the floor about the fact that you not only created it, but you wrote it and you drew it, you inked it, everything other than lettering it. How long did it take you to produce like one, issue of this comic?
It took, I could do it in about 5 or 6 weeks. The whole thing was designed and I talked to with Leighton. It was part of a series that didn't have the same kind of deadline. It came out once the books started coming out. They came out as monthlies, but I could get, so I would get 2 of them in the can before I.
Oh, okay. So you had some done up front before you started bringing them out.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I couldn't have made a month schedule on it. And then there was a pause, and I did this one special issue. But then there was a little bit of a break, to let me get ahead on the second run. So
that's awesome. That's got to be pretty rewarding to see a finished product that you're really basically 100% responsible for.
Yeah, it's the only problem with it is kind of intoxicating. You never want to go back.
Then you got to listen to all these other people that are out there telling you what to do.
Yeah, well, it's a whole different process, and it's the way of breaking down the book became interacting with myself. So I would write a scenario for the book, and then I would break it down into pictures. In essence, I used the Marvel method, but used it with myself, so that I would draw it, and by the time I had broken it down into thumbnails, I knew what the dialogue was.
Okay.
Because it wasn't, it was a nice way to go back and forth, and I could just tailor the dialogue to the pictures, etc. It's something that people like, I'm sure, Frank Miller and the rest of them. Again, once you get into that, you can say, God, why didn't I always do this? So it was it was a good experience.
Now, when you've worked on both ends of the spectrum as far as writing and drawing, which do you prefer? If you could only choose to do one continuing on, do you think you would want to work with more?
I like the writing the best, I would be willing to write with another artist, but mostly what I get are people or writers calling me, wanting me to work with them. And I'm working on a couple of graphic novel projects that I'm hoping I can talk around. That's my next step. I hope that happens.
Anything you can tell us about? Give us a little inside information.
No.
Fair enough. At least he's honest, everybody.
Well, because they're just not quite there yet. It's one of those things that you want to talk about something that's you're enthusiastic about, and one of them is very personal, and I'm curious. I keep writing on it and saying, when are we going to actually do this? But I don't mean it's personal in that, like, old girlfriends would be embarrassed, but that it was just stuff that happened that I'm trying to put together. Well, I can talk about one of the things I'm trying to put together, but no details. I went to school. One of the big events of my what they called junior high back then, they called it middle school now, was that a guy named Charlie Starkweather, who was the first, one of the first mass murderers of the latter part of the 20th century, in about 1958, 57 or 58. Went on a killing spree with his girlfriend, and he was more of an outlaw than anything else. And a lot has been done with it. There was a TV series, a couple of TV shows that documented it, and then a movie called Badlands with Martin Sheen back when, was a fictionalized version of it. And Bruce Springsteen wrote a song about it in his Nebraska album. But I was actually in the school where it was him and his girlfriend. His girlfriend's a year ahead of me in school, and the guy was he was our garbage man, and I knew his brothers, and it's something I'd like to do something telling about how that event felt from the point of view of just some kid that was in school at the time watching this happen in a world that you didn't imagine. That kind of violence that I think kids are maybe more used to now just, didn't seem to happen. The 50s was such a kind of a sleepy time, and then all of a sudden there it was, and this catastrophe was happening, and the principal got on the horn one day and said, everybody, your parents had come to pick you up, and none of us knew why, and we went outside, and there was this sea of cars, and everybody was picking up the kids because they were afraid he might still be around the school or something like that, and I thought that would be a good there's something in that for a graphic novel.
Oh, I'd buy that in a
Yeah.
heartbeat. I would read that. That sounds
That sounds
interesting.
really interesting.
Yeah.
That's I mean, just hearing you talk about it and just kind of lay the groundwork of the, just the basic feelings of how that, era was, and just the shock factor that must have, rippled through society when that happened is I'd take my money. I'm in.
Yeah, like the true crime thing's always been.
That's what I think is going to be the next thing. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to stay posted for that for sure. That's going to be definitely, in my opinion, worth taking a look at for sure. So, what you told us a little bit about your childhood there, just a little glimpse of it at least. But how did you figure out that comic books or writing and art were something that you wanted to get into, and then how did you get into the comic book industry?
Well, I didn't. I could always kind of draw, and I put myself through college doing posters for the theater department. I was the staff artist in the theater department because I was in theater. That's what I majored in. I wanted to be a theater person. And have been for all my career. I've had a dual career in the theater as well as.
Yeah, I saw you were a guest. Was it director at Juilliard?
Yeah. I did one shot at Juilliard, and I had how I got into writing was Jim Shooter knew about this play I had done. I did an adaptation of Dracula with another guy, co-authored it, and it ran off Broadway for a couple of years. And that was how I got started in writing. And before that, I'd been a director, and primarily what I've always done in the theater was directing. And anyway, I got through school and was trying to make enough money to come to New York, and went to school here in Nebraska, and was talking to a friend who was a comic book fan. And I had been a real comic book fan when I was a kid, but I had kind of stopped reading them. And it was that era when people did stop reading it. It was the only interesting thing that was happening when I was maybe 13 or 14 was that DC started reviving their superheroes. Mm-hmm. And, the Flash and the Green Lantern and that kind of stuff. But it was just about the time I was getting more interested in girls and stuff. And there wasn't that kind of Marvel universe to keep you interested. So I lost interest and got rid of my comic books. I won't even talk about that.
Oh,
and,
that hurts me.
Yeah. Man, I had... When I was a kid, you could go to the Salvation Army and buy 1940s comics for 2 cents a piece, and I had trial things. And hold on, never mind. Anyway, I realized I was desperately going to need a marketable skill when I went to New York, and I thought about, maybe I can do some occasional artwork, but I really wasn't trained enough to be a commercial artist. And a friend of mine said, well, hey, why don't you try drawing comic books? And I thought, well, maybe I could do that. And he gave me some to read, and I had no idea what had happened to comic books. So the first thing he gives me is a Barry Smith Conan. And then I start looking at what's out there, and Neil Adams was in his heyday, and Bernie Wrightson was working. Joe Kubert was just starting to do the Tarzan books. Kirby was doing the New Gods. It was one of those. Gene Colan was doing Daredevil, and it was just one of those times when everything was just knocked you on your butt.
Right.
And then there was the Marvel experience, which was really pretty fantastic. So I realized I could not possibly compete with these people on an immediate basis, but I just became obsessed saying I have to learn to do this, because it was storytelling, and I had really learned storytelling from the theater. I felt I had that ability, and enough drawing ability to say, maybe I can learn to do this. I'd really like to learn how to do it. So I really spent some time trying to sharpen out my drawing skills, and then I was again lucky. Was in New York, had some theater jobs, but still clearly did need some work, and saw an ad in the back of a Marvel comic that John Buscema was offering a course in how to draw comics. He taught it at the old Americana Hotel, rented a room, and just had us just taught for a whole year or 9 months, and I applied for the course and got in, and John got me at the end of the course, got me a job at Marvel, and that's how I got into it.
Wow, what was the first comic you worked on then?
Yeah, it was called The Champions. It was one of the weirder attempts at a group book. It had a certain charm to it, but it put together, they had leftover X-Men at that time, because it was before the new X-Men got started. And
Iceman and Angel.
Iceman and Angel, and then Ghost Rider. And that was crazy, because you always had to put Ghost Rider in because he was the most popular character. Except that he always had to have his motorcycles. No matter where he was, he had to have the motorcycle.
Presents some challenges.
In the issue that involved, there was an office that somebody had been vandalized, and it was set on fire, and so there was Ghost Rider in the middle of this office in his motorcycle. And it was a puzzlement. And the worst part, you didn't even get to draw the good motorcycle. That was when he was, driving something that looked kind of like some sort of Japanese bike with a skull on it.
It looked kind of like Eric Estrada's bike out of chips or something.
Yeah. It was like a Honda with the Punisher symbol on the front of it or something, and let's see who else was in it. Oh, the Black Widow. So that was cool. She was
Hercules was in that too, wasn't he?
That's right. Hercules was in it, and Jerry Brown, the governor of California now, was the governor of California back then too, and so they worked him in, and they had to draw Jerry Brown. Anyway, it was a strange book.
What? Wait a minute.
Wow.
So you got a book with a guy. You got a book with Ghost Rider, who has his motorcycle everywhere, Hercules, and the mayor of California.
Governor of California.
Governor of California, yeah. And it's not Arnold Schwarzenegger. Wow. That's wild.
And so that's why I felt a soft spot when Jerry Brown made his comeback now. California again. So I did that for several issues, and then I also learned about both fandom and Comic Cons at that point, because I went to the New York Comic Con, and this kid came up to me. He couldn't have been more than 11 years old, and he said, "You're Bob Hall." And how he knew that, I don't know. Maybe. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're doing Supervillain Team Up." And I said, "No, I'm doing the Champions." He said, "No, they've shifted you to Supervillain Team Up. John Byrne has taken over."
11-year-old.
You just
Wow.
I realized that was for the rest of my career how I was going to find out what I was working on with some fan.
Oh, that is incredible.
And they weren't even reading it off the internet.
No, exactly. Yeah, how he found out, I don't know. Maybe who the hell the kid was.
Yeah,
I mean,
whose son was that?
Yeah.
That's what the question is. Wow, that's incredible.
But then so I went on and did Supervillain Team Up, which I actually liked a lot better. So that was good.
Now, what was that book about? What was? I'm not familiar with the Supervillain Team Up.
It was basically a way to try to give Doctor Doom his own book. And he would then constantly it was like a Marvel team up, and instead of it being Spider-Man and another superhero, it was Doctor Doom and another supervillain. So sometimes it was a marginal supervillain like Submariner, is he a villain, is he not a villain? Another time it was the Red Skull, and the book didn't last too long, but it was fun to draw.
So it was an attempt. It was an attempt to really drum up interest in the character of Doctor Doom more than anything else.
Yeah, they just been quite popular back then, and was constantly being used in this Fantastic Four. And I think they just kind of wanted to see if it was an idea, a supervillain. Could a supervillain would it have legs enough that he could, sell his own book? And the fact is, no, he couldn't. But it was fun. It was fun to draw Doctor Doom. So, and it was. I was glad it was not a group book. I was not really capable of doing a group book at that point. I'd never been a very fast artist, and doing the Champions was quite an undertaking for somebody just walking in and saying, "Oh, you're doing a group book. Oh, thank you." So, because the first thing you find out when you start drawing comic books is that you can't draw. That you've always drawn things that you wanted to draw, and all of a sudden you've got to draw things that somebody else wants you to draw, and I've talked to other artists about this, and they agree that you're just at sea for a little while, and you keep redrawing everything, and you keep trying to make it good, and somehow you thought you could draw, but you couldn't draw, and and you're putting people in positions that you never thought, I'll never have to. They're like, well, like the first thing around, I had to draw an office. Now, how do you draw an office? And this is back pre-internet. You can't just Google the stuff yet. Where do I get reference on an office? Why would anybody have reference on an office? What do I do? And I ended up going to the office where my wife was working and taking Polaroids. But weird stuff, and it also. It takes you a while before you have the ability to fake stuff the way, like, I don't know, the Buscemi's could do it. They just, both those guys saw things as shapes, and they could draw a shape and then, stick a little bit of detail in, and they seem to have a photographic memory for the shapes of things. And I can do that a little bit now. I can't do it like those guys could. I never could, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it at all back then. I had to have reference and everything. And you can't have reference and everything when you're a comic artist. It just wasn't time. Now it's a very different world with the internet. Of course, people work photographically often, but you couldn't do that then. It was just impossible.
So what I'm hearing is I might have a promising future as a comic artist because I already know I can't draw, so I've got a leg up on everybody else.
Yeah, really. So I don't think I was slow. Like John Byrne came in and he had his style. He came in and he knew what he was doing. It took me, I think, a good 5 years before I did anything that I thought was. I was amazed that I wasn't fired, and think probably if Buscema hadn't gotten me the job, I would have been. Although now people bring me those first books and say, I love this book, it's so great. And I think, my God, it's terrible. But
I think that's just the artist in you, though.
But your criteria is different,
Yeah, I think that's true of anybody that finds any level of success in something that they're really passionate about, is that what they're doing now they always feel like is better than what they did before, just because they're always striving to improve their, whatever it is that their art form is, whether it's, drawing or writing or building a website or whatever it might be, whatever their craft is.
And the interesting thing is I've seen it happen to other people, that I doubt if there's any artist, who doesn't think that he gets more sophisticated and better as his work goes on. And people will sometimes just love the early stuff and what you did, and there's something about it, the charm, and maybe they saw it when they were 18 years old and when they were just really taken with comic books, and it depends a lot on that too. It depends on you when you see the work, maybe even more than at what point in the artist's career you see it. So, or as Woody Allen did one of his films, had people keep coming up and saying to him, "We liked your earlier funny stuff." In Starlight, I think it's called Starlight Memories or Stardust Memory or something like that. Anyway,
Yeah, stuff that brings back that nostalgic feeling.
Yeah. So, if somebody happened to read Supervillain Team Up the first year that they were really into comics, they're going to think, wow, that's part of this wonderful universe and stuff. So, and who am I to say that it isn't? That's it. That I think is great.
That's awesome. Well, Topher, do you have any other questions? I know Topher has to jump out of here kind of early before we finish up, but Topher, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm kind of intrigued by your background in theater because, comics with all the Marvel movies and stuff now, it's becoming more mainstream to be into that kind of thing. But for a long time, comics were more of a nerdy pursuit, and I guess not as lofty as maybe some other art forms. So I was just curious about your perspective, having a theater.
Excuse me, would you repeat just the tail end of that? All of a sudden you broke up a little bit.
I think we may have lost him. I think what he was saying is, what is your perspective on that now that... hello?
Yeah.
Okay, you're still here. Yeah, good. It looks like we're losing him. But he was curious about, what your perspective on that might be, considering you came from the opposite end. You started out with the theater background rather than the the whole comic book industry, and then now people are starting in the comic book industry and then consulting on the the major motion pictures and stuff.
Well, I think first of all, I think this is a minor kind of complaint, but I think there are people who feel only now that comic books are have achieved some importance because major movies are being made of them. How can they not be art if the Avengers is the one of the best selling movies of all time? Blah blah blah. But I think in fact that it's a remarkable American art form, that it still hasn't been received the credit in the way that it needs to have. I think people are now taking it more seriously, and I'm amused that people are reviewing comic books as if they were novels coming out or films coming out. And I think that's good. I don't mean I'm amused like how silly. I mean but I think it's funny if you were working in the biz back when it had no cred, and it was still a little bit underground-ish, even though it was mainstream. But there was something about it that still felt like it was a guilty pleasure that adults were starting to have, and that people still wanted to read. So adults would like Silver Surfer and Doctor Strange and some things like that. You felt that it was going somewhere, and that it was beginning to become recognized as really a great American art jazz. And I think that it always has been that. And one of the things that I'm pleased about now is just watch stuff get reprinted from the 40s and early 50s that really it's extremely worthy. And I don't know, stuff like I went into a museum in Taos, New Mexico. We were on vacation, and I looked at some modern Indian pottery, and somebody had painted on the pottery what looked to be an Aztec-feeling outline of fighting each other. I have recognized it as being with an exact tracing of Kirby cover of Hercules fighting Thor.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I thought that was very cool, actually. He wasn't trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. It's just that influence Kirby has had on American art, I think, is astonishing and still unrecognized. But that he's just a major player in what art looks like today. And we don't even realize the extent to which his influence is out there.
You mentioned being in the biz back then, and how much different it was. You mentioned Neil Adams earlier. A few weeks ago, we had him on the show, and he was talking to us about how back when he was, I don't know if it was when he was starting out, or at some point, when the whole people were just chopping up original art pieces rather than returning them to the artist, and that kind of became his goal to advocate artist rights and everything like that. And was that happening when you were starting out? When you were doing the supervillain team up and all this?
No, that had just gone down. I was lucky. I came in, and they had just started an incentive program at Marvel. Royalties, but they called it an incentive program. Because royalties, they were afraid, indicated that you did actually own something. And they
whoa, why would they give you ownership of something? God forbid.
But it was also just at the time that they were doing the Neil and what's his name? I can't retrieve it right now. The guy who invented the Joker and
the name's on the tip of my tongue too. I'll have to look it up later.
Just died this year, but they were after getting Siegel and Schuster some piece of the Superman movie, and so it was still going down that the idea was that it somehow was still fair that people had created these amazing characters, but got left behind in the dust unless you were Bob Kane, who had a good sense of I better do a piece of this.
Right.
But we at that time, I think we considered it hadn't gone round to another generation yet. We were considered that we were lucky because we were getting royalties, and at that time we were getting royalties. I mean, it wasn't like the situation that beginning in 2000 where all of a sudden nobody got royalties. It was almost every Marvel book you got something. So sometimes it wasn't much, and you weren't getting a ton of money, but it was better than it had been 5 years before.
Right.
And it was getting better, and I think Marvel was okay. Jim Shooter did his best, I think, to try to get people paid well, and continued with that. People go back and forth about Jim, but I think for me, he was good to work for. He made sure that people who worked at Marvel continued to get work, and kept reminding you. He would actually remind you that you needed to ask for a raise now and again, which was doesn't sound like much now, but boy, that wasn't the feel in the business when I first got into it. The feeling was, that you better learn to draw fast because it was going to always be a by the pound profession, and that if you couldn't be as fast as John Buscema or Jack Kirby or somebody that you'd never really make a living at it, So it went through quite a change from that.
Wow, it's so incredible because from our perspective, all of this stuff had kind of grown roots and taken shape by the time that we really had any recollection of what a comic book or a comic book industry for that matter is, all these changes had already, shaped the direction that it headed today, is headed in today.
Yeah.
It's so incredible to hear it, a firsthand account of what it was, what it was like in its quote unquote, infancy or toddler stages.
Yeah, I think my first page rate was something like $40 a page for pencils.
Oh wow! Now was that considered good by? I mean, how does that compare for some of us that are not in the comic book industry? Working for Marvel and $40 a page then versus what would be like a Marvel typical average page rate now.
I have no idea.
No idea.
But no idea. Nope. But I don't want to think about it. but yeah. But that was considered. That wasn't considered. You wanted to be in comics, and you said, "Wow, I made it into." And then eventually you said, "Yeah, I wait a minute, I'm not quite making a living." The crazy thing is that it was not that much different than a lot of people now who kind of struggle around and do more than one job, and it was like working for McDonald's. Except that you were yourself. You walked to the newsstand, and all of a sudden your comic book was on the newsstand.
That's got to be such a rewarding feeling.
Yeah, and you thought, well, maybe I want to ask for the raise for a couple of comics that you're always afraid to say, you're fired.
Speaking of rewarding, I actually just got a message from Topher that had to leave, and he got disconnected from the call. He wanted me to share with you that after you mentioned the book that you created 100% by yourself, he was in his head trying to go back over his life and recollect 5-week periods, and he's pretty sure that he doesn't think he's ever done anything with any 5-week period in his entire life that is as cool as single-handedly creating something that like a comic book that is out there for the public, for the whole world, that the opportunity is here to read, and potentially years and years to come will potentially enjoy that. That's pretty incredible.
Well, look, talking again about how things were back in the day, you got to remember that most of us were working towards trying to produce 2 to 3 pages a day. I couldn't do that if I sat down at the drawing board now. It's a almost athletic kind of.
That seems like a lot, yeah.
Thing, and you have to once you get into the swing of it, you can do it. And there were certain people who did more than that. I mean, there were people who could produce, 4 and 5 pages a day. Usually those were looser pencils, and thinkers who were going to make a living back then. They had to be able to do more than 1 book a month. Somebody as good as Tom Palmer was doing, at least 2 books a month, if not maybe like 2.5 or something, if you could work on a movie book, where it didn't have a monthly deadline. And you just tried to squeeze in as much work as you could, and you learned to do it. So that somebody like, who did finish? Well, Gene Colan did very finished pencils, and he could do 2 books a month.
Wow.
And it was just not. It wasn't considered unusual. So you learned ways of doing that. And you had to do it. I mean, at those page rates, there was no other choice. That was the only way you make it.
That's wild. Well, I have a few more questions that I want to sneak in here real quick.
Sure.
So from your standpoint of having been involved in the comic book industry over, as it developed from, what it was then to what it is now, what are your feelings about the movies, considering, you've been involved with the comic books from the art as well as the writing, but you've also been involved in the theater. How do you feel about, the Arrow TV show and the Marvel Cinematic Universe and these things that are coming out now?
Well, let me say that I've got to get Arrow from Netflix. I have cable TV.
I don't have cable TV either. That shit's too expensive.
Yeah, I just I pick up things as they go, and I tend to watch the series. And I'm going to get Arrow, but I haven't looked at it yet. So my my favorite comic book is Sherlock, which I consider basically a comic. It's like a good comic book because it's well written and stylishly visual of TV shows. But I think of the movies, and you got I think the big thing about the movies is it slowly it's become clear with the Marvel movies, I think, that what you have to do to make them successful is hung to more or less what Stan and Jack and Roy Thomas and a whole bunch of people, developed. That seems to be what works, which is kind of gratifying. That when Joss Whedon had this, the Avengers, I think he did just a good job of. It's different. I think that, it's not the same characters exactly, but it captures this feel of the Avengers at a point where they were a lot of fun, and it's fun to be in the theater at that point when Tony Stark, I can't remember, is it Stark or Captain America? I can't remember who it is. It says to the Hulk, and the Hulk says, "What do I do?" And he said, "Smash," and the audience goes crazy, and everybody applauds.
Yeah, they did do a fantastic job with the fun moments in that movie.
And so I think that when that happens is my biggest pleasure. I think that there were a lot of strange missteps along the way, and a lot of the missteps are when they just can't bring themselves to go with what Marvel did. That's with the Marvel ones. I think the Marvel things basically work when they find a way to keep to them.
Now, what about the DC side of things with the progression? We've talked on this podcast quite a few times, actually, about the development of the Batman cinematic universe from, the Michael Keaton Batman through the Joel Schumacher versions, if you want to call them that, to the Nolan trilogy.
I just got to say that I intensely disliked the Nolan trilogy.
Really?
So, yeah.
Why? I'm now you've piqued my interest. Why did you dislike the Nolan trilogy?
I'm not fond of the Batman character as developed. I think Bale is one hell of an actor, although I think the raspy voice just got to get
the raspy voice was pretty ugly.
And then I also felt as it got toward, and then I liked, I thought the first one was, well, that's okay. It's okay. And I was a little disappointed that it didn't spend more time. I wanted to see, there were things I wanted to see. Mm-hmm. I wanted to see, how did he become Batman? Not going through the Tibetan thing, but just, I had hoped that they would do some of that feeling of that Frank got in Batman.
A little more year one stuff, yeah.
Yeah, of the what does it take to become a Batman? How do you fail? How does it, what? And I thought
where
that
were your missteps in the journey that took you from the baby Bat to the Batman?
And then I thought the second one was the Joker was just, he was brilliant. It was, a new take on it, and it was wonderful. And I think he kind of eclipsed Bale. I don't remember much about Batman from that movie. I just remember the Joker, and I thought that was okay. And then the third one I thought was just a piece of crap. Not that who am I? I'm not rich, so what do I know? But I thought, Batman, Batman can't get stabbed like he got stabbed. It never happened. It wouldn't happen. It was out of. It just seemed out of character. So much seemed out of character, and he seemed so weak.
You know, when you say that, I'm thinking back to, and I own the film, the third of the Nolan trilogy, and the one part that I really recall liking about that movie, the only part that I really recall liking about that movie was when he's climbing up out of the pit.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really, for me, like the only real, part that, that's Batman, like overcoming everything, like that's him. But
yeah,
it's,
and I want to see, I want to see that in Batman. I mean, I think I want to have that feeling, and I think something to me it just fell apart. and of course, he called even that. I thought, I loved him crawling out of that thing, but of course it was after the most amazing piece of chiropractic ever practiced in the history of
in a Tibetan prison.
right. Oh wow.
So I don't know. I didn't care for it. It raised a lot of passions in people, those movies, because he definitely took a stance and he went somewhere with them. So, but I want to kind of see. I'd love to see Batman come back and just be the Bat. I think to me the most successful versions have been the I can't think of the guy's name, the cartoon series.
Oh, shit.
The animated series?
Yeah, the animated series.
Batman the animated series?
Yeah, that's a pretty incredible.
Um,
For me, I think that part of the reason why the Chris Nolan, at least the first one, did as well as it did is because people were hungry for a change in the Batman theater experience coming off of Batman and Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin, which was
I think it's just too bad. I think that the first two of the here I am at the end of the day. What's his name?
Michael Keaton.
Yeah,
Tim
Burton's movies.
The Burtons were so stylish that the style of them felt good, and I thought if you're going with a traditional Joker, that Jack Nicholson was a good choice.
Yeah, he was a great Joker.
Great Joker, and Keaton was okay. I still don't feel that the ultimate Batman has been found. Maybe he doesn't exist, but because with Keaton, you sort of felt it's all suit.
Yeah,
right. That's
there's no chin underneath that suit, but so I think it's yet to be. I think the real Batman movie maybe is yet to be done, but.
That's good from the standpoint of a Batman fan like myself, and I know Pirate loves Batman. That's good to hear from somebody in the comic book industry that maybe the real Batman is not. We're not there yet. It's still going to get better. That's good.
Yeah, I think so. It's such style and such good feel to it. I think that, and I just think that there's somebody.
He's such a complex character that I think that it really would almost take a conglomeration of several people that have been influential in the character's history of comic books, if not directing, but closely consulting with whoever is directing, to really, really make it happen to do the comic books justice.
Yeah, or you get a director and writer who just click with it. It's so hard. You look at stuff and you say, why is it good? Well, it's because it's good. And in the long run, something about it will just. In most art, something is just right. Something works, and you say, yeah. And it can be like. The Joker in the last one, he just said, that's different than the Joker. And it works.
Right.
And it works. It's conviction and a brilliant actor, and it just made it.
So I have I have one more question that I want to cover, and it's okay. So earlier on, you mentioned that drawing Doctor Doom was a lot of fun in the supervillain team up series that you worked on. When, from an artist standpoint, when you're drawing a character like a Doctor Doom, do you start, or any character for that matter, like we'll take Thor for example, when you're drawing one of these characters, where do you start when you're drawing? Do you start with Thor's hammer? Do you start with Doctor Doom's cape or his mask, or where does the puck? Because I'm telling you right now, if you told me you were going to pay me $500 to draw the perfect smiley face, you probably wouldn't even pay me. It would be that bad.
If you're smart, and if you can do it, and if you're on a roll, you let your hands figure it out. And when it's clicking, the drawing kind of emerges from the page, and you think Dr. Doom, and you mustn't start with a hammer or a cape or something. You start by putting marks on the paper, all over the paper, that some of them, and they're very light to begin with, and some of them indicate just the composition, and some of them may indicate the action line of the feeling of the drawing, and start moving the pencil around. I like to work in layers so that that sounds like Photoshop, but I mean like do something like that, a very loose drawing, do it on not on the final paper, and then put it on a light table and work over it so that I can make mistakes. I can smear it with my thumb and say I'll go back and get this. But you're trying to work the whole picture all the time, and if you get in the role of that, it's amazing how much you can accomplish and how vibrant it can be. But you really do, you sort of think about the character and think about the action and see where it can go. And that's how you do it.
Oh wow!
And that's not, and I don't think that's helpful. John Giussenda used to do that for us, and the drawings would emerge as if one of those things kids used to have where they would paint with water, and there would be a drawing underneath it that once you put water on it would start to emerge. And you'd watch it, and it would just emerge out of the page. And but that's the ideal. That's kind of what it needs to be at best.
Now, we saw you at the Lexington Comic and Toy Convention just a few weeks ago, and it's funny that you say that about, a little here, little there, all around the page, because earlier the day, just before I came over to your booth, picked up a print and talked to you, Pirate and I were talking to Alan Bellman, and he was working on a commission piece of Captain America while we were there talking to him, and I was just kind of watching him, and it was exactly like that. It was a little bit here on the shield, and then a little bit up here on the helmet, and then maybe he, a couple lines on the A on his helmet, and then down to some muscle lines on his arm, and just all over the place. And to the untrained eye, it seemed like just total chaos. Like, how in the world does he, But when you say it comes out pretty eloquently, just a little here, a little there, all around the page, and then it just kind of comes out of the paper into.
Neil once wrote in something, one of his compendiums from way back when, that all drawing was kind of like mathematics, that it was this to this equals this to this. And I'm anything but a mathematic person, but that's a little bit of what you do, putting in this line and then going over and saying, now that line balances it in this line. If I put the head in here, then the chest must be down here. And if you just work on the head, there's every likelihood that you'll find, for instance, that the figure won't even go off, stay on the page, that you can't get it all on if you're trying to draw a full figure, for instance. But if you keep it jumping around, you're doing this to this, that to the head, to that arm, that looks like, but I'll look at that over there, and then it comes together.
Oh wow,
Wow.
it's really almost like poetry the way that you describe it, as far as just the magical little movements of the pencil in the hand, and all of a sudden, before you know it, you've got Batman.
When it does begin to work for you when you're rolling, it is poetry, and when it's not poetry, you erase a lot.
Now, do you, like I said, we ran into you and had the fortunate experience of getting to meet you down at the Lexington Comic and Toy Con. Do you do a lot of comic book conventions?
I'm doing more now than I used to. I'll be in something. Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Doing something, kind of a new con that's developing in Denver, and I can't tell you the name of it. I would if I could, but I can't remember. On May, first week of May, and then I do. There's a con in Louisville in June.
Derby City?
And,
No, that's not Derby City, is it?
yeah, it is. It's Derby.
Yeah, Derby City.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll be there.
We'll be back at Derby City.
Well, I'll see you there. And then I like that area of the country because I'm not fond of the big shows. They become more about wrestlers than anything else. I'm being facetious. I refer to all media things as it's one of the cons of wrestlers.
I was shocked. I was shocked at the volume of Power Rangers that were at the Lexington Comic and Toy Convention. It seemed like there was like 67 Power Rangers actors there.
Yeah, just to them. You see. What I find is you see a lot, but I don't think I've ever seen so many Power Rangers as that. You see a lot of Power Rangers. You see a lot of Walking Dead. And of course, if you do Pittsburgh, you see a lot of people from the old Dawn of the Dead, from the Romero movies. Everybody who's ever an extra zombie in one of those shows up at that convention. Just
Wow.
stuff.
That's funny.
You'll see William Shatner because he lives down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. One of our friends that we met up with and actually went to the Lexington Con with was telling us that he was not surprised that William Shatner was at that convention because he actually owns a house somewhere not far from Lexington or right outside of Lexington.
Yeah, I do. I tried to do the Lexington Con always because I stay with a friend of mine who lives in Versailles, and he lives on a farm, and Shatner's down the road a piece. He's pointed it out to me, but I couldn't tell you where it was. But it's near a town called Versailles, which is Versailles, but they pronounce it Versailles in Kentucky.
Well, that's Kentucky for you.
Yeah.
The refined English of our southern partners in Kentucky. We're all three of us that you spoke with tonight are actually from Ohio. So,
well, I live in Nebraska where we have places like a town called Beatrice, but it's pronounced Beatrice.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you so much for being part of the show today and letting us tug at your ear and learn about the comic book industry and your history and everything that you've accomplished and thank you so much.
Well, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
All right, guys, that's it for this episode of the Comic Book Nerd Nation. I'm signing out. I'm Fox 2. We got the Pirate.
See you guys.
Topher's already gone, and we have Mr. Bob Hall.
Good night, everybody.